You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Ethan Haristodoulou.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristodoulou, and for the final time for the 2023 USFL season, we are diving into our power rankings following week number 10. The regular season has officially wrapped up. Just because this is the final power rankings, though, does not mean we're done. I'll just be doing game breakdowns and kind of recaps as we roll through the remainder of the postseason for the USFL, so you can look for that next week on Monday. I won't be doing power rankings, though, for just half the league as we go through, but we will be doing breakdowns and discussion as we have every single week kind of rolled into our power rankings. But for one final time, I want you to make sure you comment down below. Let me know how you rank all 8 teams in the USFL. Where does everyone stand following the end of the regular season? And let's dive right into it. Beginning with the 2 bottom teams of the USFL, I'll reveal them in pairs as I have all season long. Beginning with, at number 8, the New Jersey Generals, and at number 7, the Philadelphia Stars. So, couple of teams toppling all the way down to the bottom of the board here. We'll start with the Generals first at number 8 with their just complete shellacking, being whacked by the Maulers 26-6. I walked away from this game just kind of asking myself, what the heck happened? We saw a completely different, far more rejuvenated Generals team last week compared to what we saw this week, where it just felt like offensively you could not get anything really going correctly. DeAndre Johnson finished the day with 3 turnovers after completely lighting it up last week. And I just have to ask myself, is the Maulers defense just that far ahead of what the Philadelphia Stars, who, to be fair, didn't necessarily have the greatest defense this season, but is that Maulers group just that far ahead of the Philadelphia Stars that you take a Generals offense that looked great one week and just turn them into practically nothing the following? It was a mess from start to finish. There was not really a point in that game where it felt like the Generals were able to maintain any sort of control. You couple that, they had 10 penalties for 75 yards on the day. They were 4 for 11 on third down. And the defense, honestly, at this point in the season, kind of feels like, I don't want to say they gave up, but the offense just kind of never really held up their end of the bargain this entire season. And it felt like if there was ever going to be a point where the defense just kind of was like, forget it at this point, it would be week 10 where the offense just kind of fell into shambles once again. I mean, running back Garrett Groshek, who I don't think has averaged more than 3 yards per carry this entire season in a game, averaged 4.4 off of the 12 carries he had for 53 yards. So, I mean, he had his best game of the season, and it was against a team that was shutting down runs all season long, and just a rather disappointing kind of crash and burn end for a Generals team that I honestly thought after the revival of the offense last week we might see slip their way into the playoffs again this year, but it was not to be done as the Maulers again trounced them 26-6. And at this point, with the offense just struggling as much as it did this year and the defense kind of collapsing as well towards the end, I put them at the bottom of my list. At number 7, like I mentioned, the Philadelphia Stars, a defense that just never really did too much, especially against the run this season. Injuries really killed the offense in this game here, and it's kind of unfortunate because it felt like the Stars were actually going to come away with the victory come halftime of this game here, but that second half, you go from scoring 20 points in the first to laying a goose egg in the final 2 quarters. You had no Matt Colburn, obviously, going into the game, so your run game's already struggling. Dexter Williams wasn't necessarily doing great anyways, but he ends up going down with an injury as well. You lost Corey Coleman on top of that, who is your the lead receiver in the USFL and your number 1 guy, closing up what your offense can do through the air in that second half. It just felt like between the struggles that they've already dealt with lackluster defense, especially against the run, and on top of that, again, the mounting injuries, and Case Cookus, who looked really good in the first half, but losing some of his playmakers really hurt him in the second. It just kind of felt like, in the offensive line play, of course, on top of that, despite the fact that they didn't let up any sacks, it just really kind of felt like it all finally overcame the Stars in those final 2 quarters. I mean, the second half, you had no drive go beyond 27 yards. It just felt like punt the entire time. Special teams absolutely breaking their back on back-to-back drives. You had the blocked punt for a touchdown, and then right after it, you have a missed field goal as well. It just was overall a really disappointing performance altogether. And I mean, the defense was even able to hold Reggie Corbin in check. For a team that could not really stop the run this year, you hold Reggie Corbin down to 12 carries for 20-something yards, 30-something yards. It wasn't even a very high total number. But then E.J. Perry and his ability to run, it just felt like the defense was not prepared for that type of athleticism at the quarterback spot. Then he really took over late in the game. Ultimately, a crash and burn finish for a team that, again, I thought was going to find themselves into the playoffs. Got this one wrong as well, but they finish off missing the playoffs in a 23-20 loss. A tough way to finish the season for the Stars, who felt like they were in a win-and-you're-in position for the last 3 weeks and just lost their whole way to the finish line. Really disappointing end for them. As for the next two teams at number 6 and number 5, the Showboats losing 27-20 in a game that I feel like the score makes it look a little bit closer than it actually was. But I mean, if it wasn't for Derek Dillon returning that 90-yard kick return touchdown to get the game going there and really it felt like spark a fire right in front of your Memphis crowd too. Everything just kind of, stalled from that point forward. Your strength in your defense kind of becomes your weakness, although you did have 3 forced turnovers in the game. You notched a couple of fumbles and a pick as well. You allowed 404 yards total on the day, 7.1 yards per play on average. You just could not really get anything done. And then on the other side of the ball, the offense, like I mentioned, you had the 3 turnovers, but your offense just could not capitalize. The running game was non-existent, and that was kind of the bread and butter and reason why things were starting to really pick up for them towards the end of the season. Cole Kelly was only averaging 5.1 yards per attempt. It was just very deflating game for a Showboats team that were just kind of out of nowhere ripped off 5 wins and then proceeded to lose the final few games they had of the season. This is a tough one because they kind of felt like a Cinderella story. They felt like maybe they could sneak in, especially with that Derek Dillon kick return touchdown, man. Talk about a way to start off a game and, let everyone know that, yeah, we're not just going to go down without a fight in this one. We're going to come out, and they came out swinging. And Derek Dillon, man, is he a playmaker and somebody that offense needs to really focus themselves around next year if he ends up coming back to the Showboats. He is a guy that is an absolute playmaker in the return game and in the offense when it comes to receiving, and somebody who just deserves a little bit more spotlight put on him next season should he be around. But unfortunately, tough end for the Showboats. They missed the playoffs, and I list them at 6. At number 5, we are looking at the Michigan Panthers here, and I have got to say, wasn't necessarily the prettiest game per se for the offense, but big thanks to special teams and E.J. Perry for coming up huge when it mattered most in this game to bring back a Panthers team that kind of felt like they were dead in the water going into the second half. You were down, 20-9, 20-6, one of those two. Single-digit score, though, compared to the 20 that the Stars had put up. E.J. Perry not necessarily lighting it up through the air, but it was in the second half when he really got going on the ground that really brought this team to life. I mean, he was 12 for 23, 121 yards. You're sitting at a little bit over 50% completion percentage, but it was those 10 carries for near 50 yards and a score. Talk about coming in and completely shocking everyone, especially that Stars defense. But like I mentioned, there was that point in the third quarter. You get the blocked punt by Marcus Sims. It gets returned to the end zone by A.J. Richardson. You get the touchdown. The team comes to life. The defense is holding strong in the second half. You kind of luck out with some key injuries, especially being to Corey Coleman. I mean, Levante Taylor and just the entire pass coverage group altogether, giving Stars fits all over the field in that second half. They're completely shutting down the passing game. Frank Ginda having an absolute game. He has a strong case at this point for Defensive Player of the Year. I feel like I have seen more games with him having 11, 12, 13 plus sacks every single week. On top of that, he's getting an interception, or he has a pass breakup here or a sack there. Talk about a guy he's like a multifaceted weapon on defense for this Panthers group, and a big reason why that defense was able to be so stout in the second half. I don't really know where I necessarily stand on this Panthers team going into the playoffs here. I feel like the North Division is such a hard one to decide on. Whereas when you look at the South, you either err on one side or the other, where it's you kind of go into this next game with the Panthers and the Maulers and a little bit of an unknown, because you have E.J. Perry come in, like I said, didn't light it up through the air, but he did impress with his legs on the ground and is clearly something that will be a bit of just an added layer to the Panthers offense that you didn't really have going through the majority of this season now with his ability to move. And on top of that, you have a Maulers team who the offense is kind of like a mixed bag, but both these teams boast really good defenses, and hats off to the Panthers, man, because I feel like I spent a large part of this season writing them off, and here they are shutting me up, and they are in the North Divisional side of the playoffs, and are just one game away from potentially playing for the USFL championship in season number 2. I give them all the credit in the world because this is not where I expected the Panthers to be. I gave the Maulers more of a shot than I did the Panthers. This is my last team that I would have expected in the playoffs, and I've got to give them credit, especially with the late quarterback change to bench Josh Love and just ultimately go with EJ Perry. Didn't really think that was going to work out for them, and I really had my mouth shut, that's for sure. Looking at the following 2 teams, though, at number 4 and at number 3, some movement here for a North Division team to start. We are looking at the Pittsburgh Maulers with a big win over the New Jersey Generals. We already touched on them a little bit here, but a deeper dive, 26-6 victory, completely just eliminating the Generals offense from start to finish. This was a textbook smothering defense if I have ever seen one. You had a couple of sacks and that was about it, but the pressure that you brought to make the Generals offense just completely out of whack the entirety of the game. You did a solid job dealing with the dual threat run game that they have there between DeAndre Johnson and Darius Victor. And on top of that, the secondary, my goodness, led by Mark Gilbert and Arnold Tarpley. They both had a pair of interceptions together combined. He also had 8 passes defensed on the entire afternoon. This passing defense from the front 7 all the way to the very back was just problematic from snap number 1 to the very final snap of the game. You have got to give this Maulers defense credit. With Reuben Foster in there as well, and some of the additions that they've just made all together, this defense is a championship caliber defense, and I've talked about it a lot this season. It really just comes down to the offense doing a good job protecting the football and making plays when they can, and I think they did a solid job in that during this game as well. They controlled the ball really well. Again, they didn't really light it up. It wasn't like some spectacular performance, but you held onto the ball for 34, almost 35 minutes altogether through the game. And you even found some success running the football, not with your quarterback, but with the running backs. I talked about Garrett Groshek and his 12 carries for 53 yards. Best game he's had by far all season, and I would honestly say probably by any running back win within Pittsburgh. And to have somewhat figured it out against a really good run defense in the Generals, you have to feel pretty good going into this playoff matchup with the Panthers. This is a very exciting one to me because I really do not know who's going to come out victorious, and I can't wait to make a pick for this game because at this moment in the week, I literally have no idea who I'm going to go with. I don't have even the slightest thought. So really excited for the Maulers. I think they did an excellent job, but they sit at number 4 for me, right behind the number 3 team in the Houston Gamblers, losing 17-10 in a game that was a defensive standoff that I don't think a lot of people saw coming. I expected this game to be the highest scoring of the weekend, and it ultimately wound up being defense through the large part of the game, with a couple of weird things happening, especially on the Gambler side of things. My first takeaway from this game, and I felt like I was thinking about it from the moment I saw it until the very end, was why on earth, after driving the Gamblers down the field, this is in the, I believe, the second quarter, you have Kenji Bahar pulled out of the game, and you bring in Montel Cozart, who hasn't played in a couple of weeks at this point and hasn't really even seen too much game time. And I understand if you're thinking, okay, trick play where Montel Cozart's running with the football, but you have him throwing the football. He ultimately throws an interception to Vontae Diggs. It shuts down that drive. And that drive right there, that play ended on the 6-yard line when it was all said and done after the Vontae Diggs interception. What happens in this game if that doesn't happen there and they punch that in for 7? You knot up the game 7-7. It's a completely different ball game, and the Breakers don't eventually go up 14-0 on you. They go up and they're 14-7, so the game's much closer. You can play it differently. I do not agree with that whole situation. I would love to know the explanation on that because I ultimately feel like and no one play can really cost you the game, but you threw away a scoring drive right there, even just an opportunity for 3 to, again, make things a little bit different with how everything plays out. On top of that, just a complete inability to finish drives altogether. You're 1 for 3 in the ends in the red zone there, with that one interception being included in that number. It was just a very weird game for them. You have the 4th and 3 failed field goal attempt right before halftime. There's a couple of timeouts, and then the missed snap and everything. It was just so much going wrong, and I hate to see it because this Gamblers team is so much better than that. But it just came down to weird decision-making and some discipline issues in terms of just making sure you're performing your assignments correctly. And it's unfortunate because Mark Thompson had a solid game. He had almost 100 yards. He was averaging like 4.5 yards a carry. He had a touchdown. I'm at a loss with this Gamblers team because it's unfortunate that they're in the South Division and they missed the playoffs, because this is like the one team that I really feel like missed out on the playoffs that deserves to at least be in the playoffs, but isn't because of the way the entire league is structured and just where they happen to fall in division-wise. Defense did an excellent job shutting down the run in this game. They allowed only 23 yards for just like 1.5 yards per carry, and all I'm left here wondering is, if that Montel Cozart pick doesn't happen and they punch it in there, what does this game look like? Because that's the 7 points you need to have that game tied at the end of regulation. What happens in overtime, or just how does the rest of that game play out if the game is knotted up rather than being in a position where you're down 7-0 and then ultimately behind 14-0 when the Breakers go ahead and score following that? A team that missed the playoffs that I firmly think is one of the better teams in the USFL, hence why I have them at number 3, but they're going to be on the couch watching next weekend, and it pains me because I really loved rooting for the Gamblers this season. It was really fun to watch them. Kenji Bahar was just a breath of fresh air considering the struggles that they had in the passing game last season. Mark Thompson on an absolute tear. I hate that we're not going to see him next week, but it is what it is. Gamblers sit at number 3, and probably the only team that I sit there and look at and think, man, I really wish that they were in the playoffs. But who would you take out for them instead? I don't really know. And then for the final 2 teams to cap things off on the power rankings at number 2 and at number 1, we're looking at the New Orleans Breakers in that number 2 spot and the Stallions sitting firmly in the number 1, as these two teams have sat for me the last handful of weeks now. Breakers, big win over the Gamblers. I will say that, for as ugly as the running game was, they're continuing to find success in the best way possible, and that is just really good ball distribution amongst all their talent. You had 9 different players targeted in that game for a reception, and on top of that, you had 5 different receivers catch 3 or more passes in the game. That is the type of just... You want your defenses that you're going against to not know where that ball is going. With so much skill talent, you never really want to zero in on one person. Like, yes, you can have a guy who's having a really good game, and Johnny Dixon, definitely one of those guys this week, and for a handful of points, but you've also had Jonathan Adams have good games. You've had Wes Hills have really good games. You've also had Sage Surratt have really good games. That's how you want it to be, where one week, one guy will step up amongst the rest, but you have a litany of skill talent, and you want that ball distributed out as evenly as possible so that everyone is a threat each and every single week, and someone's going to be able to really take advantage of it. Running game, again, not great, but the passing game was phenomenal. McLeod Bethel-Thompson looked great. It felt like he barely missed a throw. He was nearly 75% completions with his couple of touchdowns that he threw, over 200 yards. I mean, just a beautiful game altogether. Vontae Diggs, like I said when I was talking about the Gamblers, that massive interception on the 6-yard line, I think, is a huge difference maker in this game. And I'm still left wondering what that game looks like without that interception right there. Defense all around was a really strong performance by them. While Mark Thompson did have a pretty strong day, they were able to limit things through the air, and that's kind of been the MO of the Breakers this year. They're very much a bend but don't break defense. They hold really well, and it also ultimately just comes down to keeping teams out of the end zone, and they've done a really good job so far the last few weeks. And I just want to give a specific shout out to Vontae Diggs and Gerard Fernandez. Those two as a linebacking core, it almost doesn't even feel like they're linebackers. It feels like they're almost like DBs with how they play and just how quick they are all over the field, and the ability to get after the football in pursuit. I mean, a combined 19 tackles between the two guys. This Breakers team, I feel like, is in a very different position than they were last year. Whereas they were struggling towards the back half last year going into this game against the Stallions for the playoffs, we get the rematch between these two teams now. It's the 6th time these two teams have played in the last 2 years, so the rivalry is definitely there. But the Breakers come in a much better position than I would argue last year. And then the Stallions sitting at number 1, I can't even remember the last time I didn't have the Stallions at number 1. I mean, there's been a couple of weeks where they weren't that number 1 team, where they had a little bit of an issue at like the early-ish portion of the season, but they've been sitting at number 1 now for at least like 5 weeks or something like that at this point. They're 27-20 win over the Showboats, and like I mentioned when talking about the Showboats, I feel like the score made that game look a little bit closer than it actually was, but if you take away that kick return touchdown at the beginning of the game, I mean, it was pretty much Stallions all game long. The turnovers, a little bit concerning. That is something that you cannot do against the Breakers next week and should be their focal point, is just protecting that football. Magoo had the pick. He had a couple of fumbles from from CJ Marable and Jay Sternberger. So you want to make sure that you're protecting the football next week come that playoff game. But overall, I mean, Alex Magoo locks up the MVP, as he's kind of had it locked up now for the last, I don't even know, it feels like a month at this point. I mean, who else are you going to give it to if it's not Alex Magoo? Your trio of skill players at the wide receiver position, plus CJ Marable, between Davian Davis, Jay Sternberger, and now even Deion Kane is really getting in on the fun. I think he's really improved this back half of the season. Obviously, he's been great in special teams, but there's been some hits or misses with him throughout the season. And now these last few games, I feel like he's really starting to become a legit guy, that legit number 3 for them through the air. Offensive line allows 0 sacks. And as I mentioned, with all the offensive struggles that the Showboats came across during this game here, you completely shut down the run. You made it an awful day. And it's not even like you really brought too much heat. It was just the disruption that this defense brought to everything that they were trying to do. And you didn't even have Scooby Wright. I thought he was playing in this game. I saw him activated to the roster and then ended up being a last-minute scratch. And honestly, that kind of makes sense. You might as well give him another week to just kind of sit, rest, and get ready to go. So he's playing in that very first playoff game. I would have liked to see him knock some rust off in this game, even if he got a few snaps, if he was able to. But I'm not the coach. I'm just here sharing my opinion. But overall, a phenomenal end of the regular season. The Stallions sit at the very top of the mountain as the defending champions, going into this, as I would say, the odds-on favorite to go back-to-back and win another championship. I cannot wait for playoffs. It's bittersweet where we are right now. Season's coming to an end, but it is what it is. We got 2 weeks to go. Picks will come out on Friday for this weekend's games, so make sure you tune in for those. NFL content's going to start picking up now that the USFL season is coming to an end. Hope you all stick around for that as we roll through the rest of the offseason. And don't worry, I will not abandon the USFL this offseason. I'll make sure to push out plenty of USFL stuff for you all. But that is it for me. I appreciate you if you made it to the end of the video. I will catch you all next time. Have a good one.